It is easy to forget that we are in the middle of a presidential election, but we're now just 190 days from the general election. But Joe Biden, he's warning that the president could try to delay things. At a fundraiser, the presumptive Democratic nominee recently was quoted as saying this: "Mark my words, I think he's going to try to kick back the election somehow, come up with some rationale why it can't be held." Trump is trying to let the word out that he's going to do all he can to make it very hard for people to vote. That's the only way he thinks he possibly can win. Now, Biden is right about Trump trying to make it harder for people to vote, as the president is opposed to things like mail-in ballots, early voting, that have proven to drive up turnout. Just take a listen for yourself.
You were highly critical of mail-in voting, mail-in ballots for voting.
I think mail-in voting is horrible.
You voted by
It's
mail
corrupt.
in Florida's election last month, didn't you?
Sure, I could vote by mail for that.
How do you reconcile
Because I'm
that?
allowed to. Well, that's called out of state. You know why I voted? Because I happen to be in the White House and I won't be able to go to Florida to vote. I think that mail-in voting is a terrible thing. I think if you vote, you should go. And even the concept of early voting is not the greatest.
Just as a reminder, we do have other states in this country that do allow mail-in voting and early voting. Let's bring in our guest to discuss. Joel Rubin. He was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Obama administration, and is kind enough to give us a few minutes. First of all, Joel, this isn't the tinfoil hat idea that the president could even try this, whether or not he has the authority to. That we'll discuss in a second, but it's certainly not beyond the pale.
It's really ridiculous. And Richard, I'm glad that you're covering this, because the president is essentially telling the country that he doesn't want people to vote because he's afraid of what will happen if more Americans come out to the polls in November. Clearly, it's a strategy: keep people at home, depress the vote. That's how he'll stay in office. And no, he has no legal standing whatsoever to tell states how to conduct their elections. The majority of states have mail-in voting. It's safe, it's reliable, it's verifiable. And what he's doing is he's creating confusion and fear and trying to say, essentially, if there's mail-in voting, Democrats, if they win, it's because they stole the election, and he'll try to delegitimize the next president. And that's very unfortunate.
And again, just so no one thinks, well, Trump would never go there, listen, just as a reminder to what he said in the last presidential election as we were coming down the wire.
The election is being rigged in an effort to elect Hillary Clinton president. I will totally accept the results of this great and historic presidential election if I win.
Okay, just a little reminder for you. Now, I just can't get out of my mind, though, Joel, the scene that we saw not long ago in Wisconsin. During the middle of a pandemic, somehow, some way, officials in Wisconsin, and upheld by the courts, forced people to go out and vote. We now know at least 20, if not many more, were infected in the process, including a poll worker, for people just to exercise their right to vote. They literally had to weigh an equation as to their health or their constitutional right. You would think it's beyond crazy, especially if, as some are saying, in the fall we could be looking at a second spike, that we could see that scene playing off nationally here. But as it sounds right now, that could be just what we could be looking at.
Yeah, it's horrifying, Richard, to think that the president of the United States would prefer that people stay at home, or if they go out, that they essentially put themselves at risk, so that would keep them staying at home. And that is his preferred outlet. Making Americans sick should not be an option when it comes to elections. I serve on the town council in a municipality in Maryland, where we also have an election coming up. And we've decided that we want to protect our residents' health. So we're mailing them ballots that they're going to mail back, and they will verify with a legal validation and insignia that this is a legitimate ballot from them. That's how we keep our families safe, our communities safe, and our democracy whole. The president is trying to put Americans in an untenable position because he knows he won't win if people come out and vote, or if they vote by mail because they don't want to die as a result of going out to an election.
Can the argument be made, though, that let's look closer at what happened in Wisconsin? You had a state Supreme Court justice which was a huge surprise. A Democrat elected there that is going to be a hugely significant post potentially here, as now it's only a one-seat swing in that state. That be careful what you wish for. If you try and make it harder and harder for people to vote, you're only going to incentivize a disenfranchised population, if you will, here to exercise their right.
So in Wisconsin, there's so many layers of faulty democracy there. It's the most gerrymandered state legislature in the country. An overwhelming majority every year votes Democratic, but roughly 2/3 of the seats in the state legislature are Republican. And so, yes, the voters, when they have a chance to vote statewide, they're voting just like they did a couple of years ago for a Democrat. They did for governor, and now they did for the judge as well. And it turns out that active Democratic progressive groups in particular engaged voters aggressively, again, through texting, through calling, through touching voters. And they turned out about 1.1 million voters, about the same level as 2 years ago, nonetheless. And that's because Democrats were mobilized, and we're going to see real participation. But it shouldn't have to be like that. And the voters shouldn't have to choose whether or not they're going to be healthy. They should have all the options available to them and not have the president telling them, risk your life or stay at home.
And by the way, we don't even have to divine, what's the motivation here for both, in the case of Trump, but even Republican leaders on the Hill, is to be fighting this mail-in balloting or early voting, because they've said outright, if you let more people vote early here or even vote absentee, it's going to be bad for Republicans. They've already gone on the record, Joel, haven't they, as to saying this is nothing about, vote security or to make sure that we don't have, any false voting. This is strictly about who wins and loses if more people vote.
Yeah, and Richard, I don't even think Donald Trump accepted the results of the 2016 election, because he still complains to this day that it was rigged against him. Even though Hillary Clinton had more than 3 million more votes, he still seems to have a gripe that somehow that wasn't legitimate or true. So he really doesn't believe in democracy. He certainly doesn't want the American people to vote in this upcoming election in a safe manner that gets them out to the polls. And I think that's because we see it as well. His party's relying on a minority to keep control. 53 senators are Republican. They represent about 40% of the American population. It's no secret that the Republicans are surviving because of gerrymandering and because of these minority rule situations like we have in the Senate. And we need to have that change, and we need people to be allowed to vote openly and fairly. That's America. That's democracy. That's how we get our country back on solid footing.
Your lips to God's ears. Joel, I appreciate a few minutes as always. Thank you so much. All right, everybody, when we come back, let's talk a little baseball, but believe it or not, it has to do with COVID. Spring training, it is canceled, of course, the baseball season on hold, but Major League Baseball has still been busy. After the break, we'll explain how MLB is involved in a study that could teach us a whole lot about coronavirus and how to deal with it.